Hi, I'm deep in the reads, and I'm sitting next to a big old pile of books, and on BookTube, that normally means somebody's about to do a book haul, but as you can probably guess from the thumbnail and title of this video, I'm unhauling these books, which I guess is the trending, hip new phrase for getting rid of your books. But in this case, I'm not really getting rid of them so much as I'm donating them, giving them new life with new people who can appreciate them in new ways, and all that stuff. So, what I'm gonna do is talk about my donation, talk about the books I'm passing on, and you're gonna sit there and like it, and maybe be inspired to donate some books yourself. So let's get right into it. First, let me explain a little bit about where these books are going. It's a little nearby place, you might have heard of it. It's called Uganda. Uganda is a central or eastern central African nation which happens to border another country called South Sudan. You might have heard of South Sudan in the news, but it wouldn't be for anything positive because it is still embroiled in a horrific civil war called the Sudanese Civil War. It's considered one of the worst humanitarian crises on earth right now. Starvation, millions displaced, many thousands killed. This Sudanese civil war has been going on in various forms for decades, and it goes back to Sudan being artificially nationalized and had borders put around it by the British Empire. It enclosed hundreds of very different cultures and languages and religions with all of these tensions and kind of forced them together. And so in 2011, I believe, Sudan was torn asunder literally by the civil war and the nation of South Sudan was formed. The civil war is continuing. The point is that with so many millions of people displaced, they end up in a lot of surrounding African nations and other countries around the world. One of those nations is Uganda. And in Uganda, there is the Numanzi refugee settlement. You might think of refugee settlements as very sort of temporary, maybe a few hundred people tops, but this settlement has 52,000 people in it. It's existed for decades now, to the point where the person that I'm talking to that got this whole donation ball rolling grew up there and is now an adult living in my city and is trying to collect 2,000 books by the end of this year in order to found and start a library within this settlement. Essentials that you might hope for in a place like that are kind of scarce, especially things like education. So the person I'm speaking to founded the Konibai Education Initiative. I've got my notes right here. Konibai Education Initiative, which is this very small non-profit startup which to date has given scholarships to 17 kids. Now, that's a huge accomplishment. It's certainly more than I've done, but of course it's only the beginning. They want to do a lot more to help uplift the people in this refugee settlement in Uganda. And one of the keys to doing that is to promote literacy. So that's where I come in. That's where all of these 2,000 books come in to found this library. And I'm making my small contribution here. So I'm pretty excited for that. It's, you know, normally when I think of donating books, I think of things like nursing homes or, you know, school libraries. I've donated to prisons in the past, but this is by far the furthest afield I'm going to ever probably send my books. The books he's looking for are mostly books for kids, but also classics, also educational and reference material, things like that. And as far as I know, like, there's various languages that he's accepting, with English obviously being one of them, and then there's also Arabic as far as I know. But anyway, now that I've gotten that explanation about where I'm sending these books to, I'm just gonna go through them one by one and let you know what I think of them and why I'm donating them and all that. So let's get into them. The first book that I've got on this mighty stack here is The Pearl by John Steinbeck. John Steinbeck wrote a lot of classic novels like Grapes of Wrath and East of Eden, which are two of my favorite novels, incidentally. And The Pearl is one of his sort of lesser classics, but it's still an interesting book. I actually think it's a great introduction to reading classics. A student in 7th or 8th grade could read this no problem. It's an enjoyable story, but it's, you know, it's not something that I need to keep because I've got a big book that collects all of the short novels of John Steinbeck, including this one. So having this is now a redundancy. But yeah, that's that. Next up, we've got Jinping Mai, which was written by an anonymous author. It is a 1600s or 1500s Chinese novel. I picked this up on the discard cart at my library and I read the back, seemed interesting, got it home, looked it up, and while it definitely seems like a really important classic in Chinese literature, this version is abridged, and I'm a little bit of a stickler, so I'm just like, okay, if I see a modern translation of it, I'll pick it up, but in the meantime, I don't feel super inclined to keep this because of that. I feel like it'll still be, you know, appreciated by someone who might be a voracious reader looking to challenge themselves or something like that. Next book is 2010 Odyssey 2 by Arthur C. Clarke. This is from the Space Odyssey series that Arthur C. Clarke started with filmmaker Stanley Kubrick. I really love the movie. The books, not so much. I started to try and get into the books, and I think I liked them more when I was younger, but as an adult they just don't quite do it for me, so I think this would be a great thing for someone who might be a little bit younger or just getting into science fiction to try and read. Next is a mega classic, I'm sure you've heard of it, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. This is a book that some of my friends would be sad to see me parting with, especially because, unlike the other books here, I have not read this book. The reason I'm getting rid of it is because it's an old translation from Wordsworth Classics, and I would like to get a new translation, maybe something that's won an award or has some acclaim behind it, because, you know, I don't speak any other languages, so I need other people who do to tell me which translation is best, and apparently this isn't the best, so I'm just like, well, I'll donate it, and hopefully somebody gets something out of it. I hear this is a great adventure novel, so I'm sure it'll get value where it ends up. Another classic here, George Orwell's Animal Farm. I loved this book when I was a teenager. This is a pretty battered copy that me and my younger brother used for school. I don't particularly need to keep it. I feel like Animal Farm is such a short classic that you only need to read it once or twice, and I've probably read it 3 or 4 times, so I'm ready to part with it, but I hope that it brings some people some inspiration, you know, gets them thinking about social issues if they aren't already being in a refugee settlement, but, you know, I'm beginning to realize I've got a very Western-centric bias to my books, but I mean, what can you do? These are books that I got when I was a teenager, when I was not as expansive or broad in my reading habits, but anyway, that's okay. We've got some foreign books that are works in translation in here, including this one. It's Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. This was a Russian novel that came out in the 50s, was banned in the Soviet Union, smuggled into the West, and won either a Pulitzer Prize or the author won a Nobel Prize for Literature. But either way, this is an epic classic set during the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War, and all of the displacement and danger and turmoil that came out of that. It's just occurring to me now that this might be somewhat morbid reading in the context of a Ugandan refugee settlement, but it is a classic for a reason. I'm sure someone could enjoy this if they cracked it open and gave it a shot. This is, right here, another novel by John Steinbeck. It's one of his lesser-known novels. This is called Sweet Thursday, and it is the little-known sequel to Cannery Row. I read this book a few years ago. It's like a solid John Steinbeck novel. I figure I don't need to keep it, might as well donate it. This is another one that I'm sure everyone has heard of. It's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. I have a vintage illustrated copy of this, which is like one of the earliest editions that featured the Oompa Loompas, because, you know, the original version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I think, used pygmies, like human beings, as the weird little workers in the chocolate factory, which is all kinds of fucked up, to the point where even Roald Dahl realized it was fucked up and was like, I'm gonna change them to fictional creatures instead, because that's a little weird of me to do that with you. But anyway, this is a childhood classic. I adore this novel. It's, you know, one of those books that was really formative in my youth, and I hope it can be for somebody else. Incidentally, this is the movie version of the cover, which, you know, the movie that came out in like 2006 or whatever. But yeah, so I have 2 copies of this. I don't need to keep this one, and into the donation pile it goes. This next one is a little bit different from the others. It's called When Cancer Strikes, a book for patients, families, and friends by John A. MacDonald. Now, they said that they were okay with educational and reference material, so I'm hoping that this can fit snugly into this. This is a very readable, engaging, and layman-friendly book about cancer. Everything you would need to know as a patient, or a family member or friend of a patient, or even as a doctor, because it talks about like how to break it to a patient in the most sensitive way and all those things. Why do I have this book? Well, it was in the discard pile of my old high school, and at the time, my biggest dream was to be a novelist myself. I was working on a manuscript, and I had been for a couple years, and a big plot point of this story that I was working on was that the main character's father gets cancer and lingers over the course of about a year and then dies. But the problem was I didn't really know that much about cancer, so I saw this book, I read up about cancer, and now I can say I probably don't know as much as someone who has cancer, but I at least know more than the average person does about cancer, so that's kind of neat. And anyway, maybe it can help in a refugee center, like diagnosing someone with cancer early if they're not super able to, you know, access medical assistance or whatever the case may be. Not really sure, but I thought it could be useful, and the person I'm talking to with the donation seems to think the same thing as well. The next book is An Instance of the Finger Post by Ian Pears. I've reviewed this book on the channel before. I absolutely loved it, and I have 2 copies of it because I was sent this one by Book Depository right as they were about to close down forever, and there was a very minor sort of printing issue with the back where some of the print runs off the page, but on closer inspection you can make out all of the words. You just kind of have to tilt your head sometimes, you know? So yeah, I'm going to donate it. It's a somewhat flawed copy, but it is an excellent, excellent murder mystery novel set in 1600s England. Now, the guy did say that he doesn't want any content that's too gratuitous, too adult, too 18 plus. This book may ride the line, so when he comes to pick up the books tomorrow, I'm going to just let him know all the content that's in this book, and if he's iffy on it, I'm going to be like, okay, I'll just hang on to it and find another way to donate this. But yeah, if you haven't read this book, check it out, or check out my review of it on my channel. Another mega classic right here. This is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. This is it is the most famous Spanish novel ever written in 1615 in 2 installments of about 400 pages each. This is a complete beast. This is where you got Don Quixote, who is an errant knight. He wants to return to the age of chivalry so badly that he thinks that he's in the age of chivalry, and he, you know, dons a helmet and he gets a sword and he runs out and to, you know, save the maidens and tilt at windmills and all this stuff. So it's basically like this episodic series of chapters with him and his trusty sidekick just entertaining his delusions for 900 pages. It's a lot of fun, especially at the start. It gets a little bit long in the tooth, but if you treat it sort of as like a, what is our character getting up to on this episode of Don Quixote, then it's a little bit easier to, you know, parse, because it doesn't feel cohesive really as a novel. It just feels like a series of almost short stories of random hijinks that this weirdo gets up to. But yeah, mega classic. I have another copy of it in a modern translation, so I thought I would donate this version. Let me move this pile of books so you can see the ones that I haven't gotten to yet. Next book I'm donating is this very slim other book by Roald Dahl called Rhyme Stew. This is a series of illustrated little poems by Roald Dahl. They're very funny and witty and charming and all that stuff. Something that I think would be perfect for someone who's either just learning to read or kind of an intermediate reader, maybe like first, second grade, that sort of thing. I had a lot of fun with this book when I was a kid, but I don't really feel the need to keep it as a grown-ass adult, so I might as well donate it to someone, to a place where the proper intended audience can access it. Next up is another household name of a classic here, Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. It is a fun adventure, but I found myself thinking when I was reading it, I wish I had found this book when I was younger. As a grown adult, it's fine. It's not gonna blow your socks off or anything, but I think that this would be right up the alley of, 12-year-old, 13-year-old me back when I was reading stuff like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and things like that. So, once again, like Rhyme Stew, it's one of those books where I feel good about donating it to a place where the proper demographic can access it. Then, next up, we've got Aristophanes, an ancient Greek playwright. The play is called The Birds. This is a short comedy play where these guys just decide that if only they could transform themselves into birds, then they could be like these go-betweens between the prayers of the mortals and the gods, and they could get some leverage and power from, intervening in people's prayers. It's a pretty fun book. There's a lot of really silly slapstick humor. There's like fart humor in this. It's very weird and very accessible. Like it was written in 400 BCE, and yet I think somebody who is, again, like a teenager could read this and understand it totally fine. So I think it's pretty ideal to donate. Next up, we've got an H.G. Wells book, but it's not a science fiction book like you might think. It is The Outline of History, Volume 1. I've talked about these books on my channel before. There's 2 volumes, and it talks about the entire story of history from the beginning of planet Earth, including like the evolution of the dinosaurs all the way up to the end of World War I. And I've got 2 copies with the dust jackets on that are really vintage. They look great, whatever. So this version has no dust jacket, so I figured this is the version that I'm going to donate. It's a redundancy in my collection, so might as well pass it on. Next up, I'm so sorry I can't pronounce the author's names here, but the book is called Squire by Sarah Alfagi and Nadia Shamas. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I'm sure I didn't, but anyway, this is a okay, there go the books. This is a graphic novel about a young girl who trains to be a warrior. But then as she's training to be a warrior, she finds that she might not be on the right side and starts to learn about pacifism and resistance and, being a revolutionary for justice and things like that. It's an interesting graphic novel. I think my favorite part of it is at the back where the writer and illustrator both discuss how they go about making a page. It's kind of like this behind the scenes, how to make a graphic novel thing, and I really enjoy that part of it. This totally slipped my mind when I was recording the rest of the video, but there's one more book that I plan on donating, and that is The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. You've probably heard of it. I really like Shel Silverstein and this book, although it's kind of like a weirdly controversial children's book because the tree gives to this boy as he grows up through his whole life to the point where it almost feels like the tree is being a doormat or what have you, but obviously this book is aimed at children being read the book by their parents, so it's just kind of supposed to reinforce things like unconditional love and support and all those things. And with that as the goal of this book, I think it does a really great, poignant job at it. So I've had a lot of, I've gotten a lot out of this book over the years, so I figure it's time to pass it on, as it were, which is kind of fitting with the title of this book. So yeah, those are all the books that I plan on donating to this refugee settlement in Uganda. There you have it, my 16 books that I plan on donating tomorrow. Somebody's gonna come by and pick them up. I can't wait to do that. I get to free up some space in my apartment, give some books to a worthy cause, and get these people 16 books closer to their goal of 2,000 books by the end of 2025, and hopefully they'll be able to get their library started and give people an opportunity to read and access books that they couldn't access before. I'm quite happy about that. So I'm sure I've gotten some people interested in what I'm talking about donating possibly their books, but the thing is, right now I'm not sure if it's going to be logistically possible for you to donate your books if you don't live in the same city as me. Like I said, this is a very rudimentary non-profit organization. There's only 2 people running it right now. If you don't donate to this in particular, there's plenty of places that are looking for books to donate, whether it be prisons or schools or nursing homes, and on and on and on. So if you've got books cluttering up your shelves, don't just dump them at Value Village so they can be sold again at a profit. Find a place where people can access them for free. Maybe your library could use them. Maybe there's some local mini free library type boxes around your neighborhood. It's important that we continue to cycle these books so that they don't just kind of sit like a dragon's hoard in our rooms or houses or whatever. So, I hope I've guilted you sufficiently into donating your books and thinking about all the things that you take for granted. But, yeah, so I don't really know where to wrap up with this video other than to say I hope you enjoyed seeing me systematically go through this enormous pile of books that are slated for donation tomorrow evening. I hope my books have enjoyed this warm send-off that I've given them in the form of a frickin' YouTube video. And that's me. I've been deep in the reads. I will see you next time. Goodbye.